So, what do you think of when you think about science? And how do the images, messages, and framing choices impact how science is perceived and who is included in science? And what can we do to broaden the inclusion? Similarly, when we're talking about climate change, how can we make people comfortable with some of the big, important issues without messaging that they're impenetrable and unable for them to be unable to be understood? To answer these questions with a data-driven approach, Michelle, Annie, Kaylee, and Zach, well, they bring you something a little out of this world.
Hello, welcome to Terra 2. You have been selected by Council as one of the most esteemed city builders to design one of the new expansions for our growing population. As you may know, our original establishment is at capacity, and exploratory missions revealed suitable locations for 6 new cities. You have been assigned to Aiku, the island community with settlers well known for their investment in research and knowledge. Council urges all builders to follow their city guides to produce destinations aligned with Terra 2's core mission of sustainability. In order to not repeat our civilization's dark history on Earth, build quickly and sustainably. Good luck.
Okay, so we are going to walk you through the exciting game of Terra 2.0, and then we're going to spend some time talking about our overarching learning objectives and target audience for this game. So the major goal of the game is to barter and compete under this impending threat of carbon overload. So this is in a time where Earth has failed due to carbon misuse, and now the society is on a new planet trying to rebuild. And so I'm going to walk you through some of these major components of building a city. At the beginning of the game, each player will start with a city guide card, which represents one of the 6 cities that need to be built. Here, I have received Aiku. The card provides background on the location and tells me that while the city is rich in education, it is far from the mainland, and as such, transportation is a focus in the development of Aiku. This is further supported by the need to purchase 3 carbon solution cards centered around transportation in order to build my city. Carbon solution cards are development options used to build the city and are shown on the city guide under requirements to build. The game starts with each player receiving 9 cards. This includes 5 resource cards, 2 carbon solution cards, and 2 event initiation cards represented by the lightning bolt. Each round, a player has several options. They can roll the dice, buy a carbon solution card, or go to auction. The first few rounds, you'll most likely want to roll a dice and collect resources for carbon solution cards. A dice roll has 2 dice. One is 6-sided, where each number corresponds to an available resource, and the other 4-sided, which serves as a multiplier. Here I roll a 1, which represents the card tech, and my multiplier is a 4. So I receive 4 tech cards to add to my hand. Once everyone has taken a turn, the round ends by passing 3 cards to the player to the left. This is where cooperation can become very valuable, as you can help the neighboring cities or you can choose to act more selfishly. But remember, the more cities that are built at the end of the game, the more points that are awarded, meaning it is more valuable to work as a team than act as a solo identity. Event initiation cards add a level of randomness to the game and can be used at any time. Once an event card is selected from the POW, here, a tech breakthrough event has occurred, which limits the use of the carbon solution card lifestyle for 2 rounds. These events impact all the players and can be beneficial or harmful depending on the event and what you have in your hand. After several rounds, and once I have collected enough resource cards, I can use my turn to buy a carbon solution card. My city guide shows that I need 1 carbon solution card in the category of restoration to successfully build my city. I see that peatland is available, and I use a natural resource, a tech resource, and 2 human capital resources to buy peatland. I also have the option to go to auction. Here, I can barter and trade cards to acquire the needed resources to buy carbon solutions. This again is a great opportunity for cooperation, but you must be careful with your resource acquisition, as each resource has a carbon cost that can put you way over the approved carbon overage limit established by the council. The game ends once a person announces the completion of their city. Each player then has a round to complete their city build, liquidate resource cards, etc. The winner receives points based on the number of carbon solutions acquired and receives point for every city that was built in the final round. Points are deducted for carbon overage and for every city not built. Therefore, if you go out too quickly, not allowing other cities time to build, you could potentially end up in the negative, making you dead in the water. It is here that another completed city could calculate their points and effectively steal the win. So now that you have an idea of how the game goes, Annie's going to talk about the game's learning outcomes and who our target audience is.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, so zooming out, why did we build Terra 2.0? Our major learning objectives are twofold. The overarching goal is to discover what the best practices are for promoting and increasing science engagement and inclusion. And then more narrowly, we're trying to see if we can make climate change more accessible by using gameplay and reaching people who we call science adjacent. So who are these folks? They're adults. They're probably between 20 and 50 years old. They have aged out of traditional science outreach because they're no longer in school. Maybe they don't have kids who are bringing home this knowledge with them. And they've lost touch with science for whatever reason, be it politics, be it society, be it education. However, they love playing games and they're always looking for the next great find. So our game encompasses 4 core identities that we think will appeal to this audience. It's exciting, it makes science fun, but it sticks to reality in a way that the game doesn't feel too fantastical. It's easy to learn, and it encourages teamwork and cooperative access. So more specifically, I'd like to walk you through our 3 major learning goals and then how Terra 2 accomplishes them. The first one is very simple, to concretize the idea of carbon and allow players to budget it. And we do this by allowing societies in Terra 2.0 that are similar enough to societies in the old Earth that the solutions are relevant, but they're different enough and quote unquote fantastical enough that the conversations are empowering rather than accusatory. Our second goal is to try to provide a sense of scale for carbon solutions and to classify them by sectors. And then in Terra 2, the carbon solution cards represent real solutions for Terra 1.0, aka planet Earth. But they're grouped by sector, and cities are encouraged to invest in the solutions that make most sense for their lived reality, i.e. a city that's very heavily invested in agriculture wants to invest in agricultural carbon solutions. And then finally, we're trying to change the language of resource collecting and world building games to emphasize sustainability and cooperation. And the final rounds of Terra 2 embody this because trades are encouraged and community success is prioritized over individual victory. Because on Terra 2.0, we win when we all win.
Thanks, Tammy. So at the tail end of a very entertaining project, we looked at a month timeline to develop and begin an advertisement campaign. And along the larger theme of the NCSE, we're faced with a similar issue where we need to find groups that are historically excluded from science. And in a similar way, they're excluded from what most people would see as like some self-identity in the game players of our game. So if we go to our next slide, the first group that we look at is the kind of proximal barrier to inclusion in this gameplay, which is like these science adjacent fields that Annie described. One of the kind of, for whatever reason, historical groups that is excluded from traditional science, or at least science categorizations, is the tech field. So we came up with a couple ads that kind of mimic popular tech advertisements and tech publications, and then paired them against our kind of broader amplification of our game, which is this Gamify ad on the next slide. That looks at broad inclusion of science, where really anyone that's interested in trivia type games or really just kind of casual gameplay is gonna be really intrigued by these ads. Next ad. So on a really short timeline of a month, we had a really exciting opportunity to kind of optimize these short ads, going through a couple of testing, both appearance-wise with feedback from Facebook, and then kind of our more traditional data sets looking at reach, impressions, and clicks. And really, the number of clicks isn't really overwhelming at the end of the month, but entering kind of a global market of advertising that's available on Facebook, I think looking into the next year through optimizations of our own team and partnerships with Facebook, I think we're looking at a really exciting outreach opportunity. Next slide. So I'll pass it back to Kaylee to walk through implications and implementations.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I hope that you have so far really loved hearing about how the game works, how we know it works for functional purposes and also learning purposes, and then Zach's work with the marketing, which has been really impressive, learning how to do all that Facebook stuff. So I want to kind of wrap it up and talk about why gameplay at all. So on the next slide, we'll dive a little bit into the idea about why we picked games, right? So we have really been focusing every decision on Terra 2 with the goal of serving our audience that's kind of within this science communications community like hotspot, right? So they're not science deniers, they're not scientists' #1 fan. They're still really open to ideas, but they may bring some criticisms. And so we really want to focus on this middle of the road population in our attempt to create a positive experience about climate change centered on gameplay. The reason we chose games is because can you push me back, Emma? The reason we chose games was because we understood that fantasy is a really beneficial technique to employ when addressing difficult topics, as Annie alluded to earlier. It's a lot easier to talk about saving the hypothetical world that's falling apart rather than our own. Further, gameplay puts audience in the driver's seat. It really empowers them to make both autonomous and team-based decisions that will ideally translate into real-life decision-making and action. So when we consider all of the strengths and weaknesses of this design and in choosing gameplay, we will acknowledge, Emma. Next slide, please. Thank you. That Terra 2 is a really strong game that is utilizing data and innovative approaches for science inclusion. Playing and engaging with Terra 2 provides really ample opportunities to understand and discuss real-world climate topics, thus lowering the barrier to entry for understanding and action. While we acknowledge that there are other climate-based games out there, we really think that our fast-paced and interactive gameplay will help it stand out from the others that rely on a little bit more of a realistic, less fantastical and engaging approach. As a catch-22, we acknowledge the fine line that we're walking between producing a carbon-friendly game at a very low quantity while keeping the game affordable rather than, producing a lot of plastic or something that costs $65. Further, we're really excited to work with NCSE and make it the reputable game maker that it could be and eventually produce more science games. And so let's walk through the timeline really quickly about what this implementation will look like. So this has been a very end of the year project. So we spent about a month diving so deep into game conceptualization, building off of an early idea that Annie provided us. So thank you, Annie, for getting us started and allowing us to kind of take Terra 2 intergalactically. We started digitally designing and finalizing everything, including our advertising. This is a huge visual design push through end of November into December, finishing our advertising somewhere around the new year. And as soon as that advertising, which is pushing people to kind of engage with our Kickstarter, that's where we're going to promote as a secondary wave onto probably about March-ish. And then after that point, we will obviously have to produce this game. So we expect Terra 2.0 to be functional in early spring, being distributed around April. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us to visit Terra 2.0.